All right, in this video, I want to talk about the miracle at Cana, what's often referred to as Jesus' first public miracle. We see this in John chapter 2. This will actually be part one of a two-part series. And so I encourage you, if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that now and set up notifications so you get notified when these new videos are coming out. But in this part one here, I want to look at some very specific things in the text. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11 is the story, right? This is a very familiar story to you and me. It's one of the very first stories that we learn, I think, for many of us in Sunday school. But it's a wedding. It's a celebration. There's joy, laughter, music. And I think if we're being honest, all of that feels very distant and far removed from the cross. But John, I think, is trying to tell us a different story. In fact, the way some of the words he's using is trying to point us to the cross. See, John doesn't just include this story as that another story or the first miracle in a long line of miracles that Jesus would do. No, he says that this is a sign, and signs are never about themselves, are they? They're not. They always point somewhere else. So, in this first part, we're going to look closely at what Jesus is revealing at Cana in this miracle and why that moment quietly sets the direction for Jesus' entire mission. Okay, so let's look at verse 11 first, and I'm going to throw these up on the screen for you. But in verse 11, it says, "This miraculous sign," so there's the word, "at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." Now, he simply could have said miracle. He didn't. He said miraculous sign. He could have said it was an act of compassion, and we know that it was. He saved this couple from embarrassment, right? He could have said this was a display of power, but he doesn't. He says sign. A sign doesn't exist for its own sake. It points you somewhere else. Cana isn't the destination, really, is it? It's actually the opening signal for Jesus. From the very beginning, John wants us reading this story with our eyes forward towards something much, much bigger. So then we're going to look at verse 4 now, where when Mary tells Jesus the wine has run out. This is Jesus's response, and I think it's so telling. It says, "Dear woman, that is not our problem. That's not our problem. My time has not yet come." Now, just so you know, that's not our problem. That phrase there, that's not what I'm going to talk about here in this video, but just so you know, I did a whole sermon on that, and that's also coming in the future. So again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you're getting notified of that. But my time has not yet come. That's what I want to talk about. That sounds strange probably to you and me, right? Until we understand how John is using this phrase over and over again in his book. And I'm going to throw up 3 different passages here to give you an example of that. We see it in John 7:30, John 8:20, and John 12:23, where he talks about the time. And we understand from these other passages and John's use of the word that time is the cross. That's what Jesus is talking about. So here Jesus is connecting this very first miracle to the cross. So he's not hesitating at the wedding, right? He's not being cold. He's simply being aware of the big picture. Every sign moves him closer to suffering. Every miracle accelerates the road to Calvary. And Cana, make no mistake, is beginning that countdown. Now, John gives us another very specific detail in verse 6. He says, "Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Now, there's actually several things here that I want to cover, but to start with, this idea of 6 stone jars. You know, John didn't have to tell us how many. He simply could have said stone water jars, right? Used for ceremonial washing. So anytime the Bible gives you a specific detail like that, you should pay attention. And it does. It tells us there are 6 jars. And guys, that is not on accident. See, in Scripture, 6 is consistently associated with human incompleteness. So humanity, if you remember from Genesis, let's go all the way back, it was created on the 6th day, right? 7 represents completion and rest. 6 falls short of that. So these jars represent humanity doing its best but still falling short, washing again and again, repeating the ritual, trying to stay clean, never quite arriving. What else about these jars? Well, they're very large, right? They're very heavy, they're very impressive, and yet they're still empty. They're still empty. That is a very important, subtle picture that John has left for us in this story. Human effort can go a long way. In fact, to us, sometimes it can seem very impressive, right? But it always falls short of redemption. And notice what Jesus doesn't do here. Jesus does not add a seventh jar. He doesn't say, look, you're almost there. Just try a little bit harder and maybe you'll have it. He doesn't improve the system. That's not his intent. What he's actually doing is transforming what's already there. What humanity cannot finish, Christ will fulfill. And Cana is quietly telling us that. He's quietly sharing this. Completion doesn't come from adding more effort. It comes from somebody else stepping in. Jesus, divine intervention, right? So then as we move on, we go to verse 7, and what do we see? Jesus tells the servants this. He says, fill the jars with water. Now, that's it. There's no explanation. He doesn't give them a sneak peek, a preview of what's about to happen so they can confidently do this, right? There's no guarantee. And John tells us this, when the jars had been filled, in verse 8, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So the servants followed his instructions. Now, what had the jars been filled with? With wine? No, with water. So then he says, hey, I want you to dip the water out, take it to the master of ceremonies. Now, what's that going to do? That's going to exasperate the problem now. That's going to bring to full attention this thing that up to this point has been hidden, right? And that is the wine has run out. But yet you don't see the servants argue. You don't see them demand an explanation, more clarity, right? They simply respond to the voice of Jesus. And listen, I see this as a beautiful picture of what true discipleship is in your life and mine. It's response to Jesus, even when we don't fully understand. And guys, that's the truth of the matter. Oftentimes, obedience will come before understanding. Trust will always precede an explanation. And sometimes, guys, the explanation will not come. But can you obey? Can you trust? That's discipleship. You actually see this same pattern repeat itself at the cross, at the tomb, and in resurrection faith for your life and mine. And so, don't miss that detail. Now, the next detail is this idea of abundance. So each jar holds how much? 20 to 30 gallons. Now look, that means Jesus produces in this moment somewhere between 120 and 180 gallons of wine. That's not subtle. That's not just Jesus solving the problem in the moment. That's Jesus stepping in and overwhelming the problem. Man, guys, this is such a huge point. Don't miss this. This is not about scarcity. This is overflow. John already prepared us for this idea in John chapter 1, verse 16. And I'll throw that up for you right now. It says, from his abundance, we have all received one gracious blessing after another from his abundance. This story is just preaching that verse from the chapter before. Jesus doesn't just give enough wine to survive, just enough to get by. No, he gives grace upon grace upon grace. This abundance tells us something about the heart of God. It's teaching us something. Forgiveness doesn't run out with the Father. Mercy always will exceed your sin. Joy will replace shame in your life and mine. Cana is whispering something here that later on the cross will shout very loudly. God's solution is always greater than our failure. Do not miss that point. If the rest of this goes over your head, make sure you understand that. Jesus and his life is a life of abundance. Cana is not really about wine. Never was. It's about direction, right? Jesus is revealing who he is and where this road is leading. And to fully understand what this sign is pointing toward, we need to talk about the stone jars, right? What material were these jars made out of? We're going to talk about the law. We're going to talk about hearts and the cross in part 2 of this series. And so be sure to subscribe and get notified and check out that video when it comes out. Thanks for tuning in, guys.